Hello, checking in for the first 17 chapters of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, the 1813 novel. I think it's not her first one. It opens very briskly, especially when I think of the kind of the Trollope novels that I've been reading lately, in that Jane Austen is very dialogue heavy. And indeed, we start out with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet having a chat about there's an eligible bachelor who's come into the area, and Miss Bennet wants him to go off to kind of to introduce himself to her, because he wants the daughters to get introduced, because we quickly get the thoughts of how, as the novel goes on, how the property that they live in is entailed, which means that Mr. Bennet, once he dies, the property is going to be going off to, I think it's Mr. Collins, instead of getting split up amongst daughters. That this is the whole thing of, we don't want to break up properties, so it's going to go to one male heir, and it has to be like it's entailed to them. It's not held freely, or just what they can't do everything they want to it. It's only theirs till the time they die, which of course, and it's a male heir, so that really screws females in this society. This again is this whole thing of, it's somewhat there. These novels are really good because this novel, I can see, is really good because you have Elizabeth Bennet, who is the second oldest daughter, who is smart and sensible, and maybe has her prejudices, but is she's the vivacious heroine here. But she's living in a society that really doesn't give her fair shake, and she's like the underdog. Into this, we have Jane Bennet, who is the beautiful one. Elizabeth isn't the beautiful one. She's also good looking, but she's not as beautiful as her older daughter, her older sister. And indeed, when they go to, is it the Bingley, the guy who's come in, it's like, well, Jane actually does hit it off with him. And there's villains, basically some mean girls, that want to try and scoop them up as well, but they're not having very much luck, and they try and do everything in their mean girl way to try and drag him down. And this is all done through dialogue as well, though we do still, it's not strictly dialogue. We get a lot of kind of the dry one-liners of Jane Austen, including kind of the famous opening passage of it's a universal truth that all young ladies are in need of a good husband. I think, is that how it goes? I think it's something like that. And indeed, they are, though it's that dry wit of, in this society, a young woman is completely fucked if they don't get a husband. They will be a life of misery. So there's the good humor of it, but there's also just sort of a little bit of kind of, yeah, we're laughing here, but it's black truth, isn't it? And we get Mr. Darby, who is a very gruff, very kind of dry fellow, which you can see, especially a lot of the more vapid people in the house not getting along with. He also does actually make a comment that doesn't put him off in the best foot with Elizabeth Bennet right off the thing, because I was like, no, I'm not going to dance with her. She's not good looking enough. Which is like, well, that's a rather shallow thing in itself. But that's, again, in this novel of obviously first impressions, perhaps not being the correct ones or hasty impressions. That's appropriate that he has that kind of viewpoint. And as the novel goes on, Elizabeth meets Mr. Is it Willoughby? Wilkinson? I'm going to have to get my names right. Who really badmouths Mr. Darcy. saying that he basically did him out of the position that had been promised to him by Mr. Darcy Sr. because of his jealousy. So he sort of feeds her some lines that sort of confirm her prejudices to the point where she's quite poisoned against Mr. Darcy without, spoiler alert, because I sort of know how it goes along in a general sense, without really kind of weighing the thing. She just immediately accepts what he says is true without, knowing who this guy is and whether he seems like a very affable fellow, but maybe he's not everything he seems to be. So yeah, that's how we've started out with Pride and Prejudice, and I'll continue along with there. I might have even done this one before. I periodically have done a little Jane Austen, and so far I am enjoying this one. I can see why it's very well suited for adaptation, just because it's got such great snappy dialogue in there. Though the asides, the narrative asides are also just really wonderful. And it's funny, it's done in a very kind of a light setting, but there is a lot of kind of probing around, and just even in the conversations about, like, what's the right thing to do, what's the proper thing to do, what's the difference between pride and vanity, and yeah. So it's got a lot on its mind, even if it's set in what you might consider a very frivolous, feminine setting. As a big macho reader, you have to guard yourself against rather just dismissing this as light stuff. I think as someone who's been enjoying all of Trollope's love triangles and how they suddenly snap into focus too, I will hopefully not fall into that trap. And also just a sort of that there's also a satiric side of, you can see that Jane Austen is taking already established romantic tropes and kind of gently making fun of them while filling them with some sharper insights into her times and the manners and prejudices of her times. So yeah, all right, I'll leave it there. Good night.